Hello wonderful people, in this video today I'm going to be talking about a condition called POTS. I'm going to be going across the symptoms and I'm going to explain why it is so often misdiagnosed as anxiety. POTS is a disorder of the autonomic nervous system. This nervous system controls your breathing, blood pressure, heart rate, digestion, sweating, and all these things that you don't have to think about in order to do. A lot of people don't realise, but they are controlled by your brain and nervous system. You just don't have to think about them. They're things that your brain does automatically. POTS stands for Postural Orthostatic Tachycardia syndrome and is diagnosed when a person's heartbeat increases by 30 beats per minute on standing or 40 beats per minute if they're aged 19 or below. This happens because for most people, when they stand up, the blood vessels in their legs can constrict, meaning that the blood flow can be equal or enough to different areas of the body. But if you have POTS, your blood vessels don't constrict enough, so your blood basically just falls to your feet. And this causes a high heart rate because your heart rate increases to compensate for the lack of blood flow to other areas of the body. It's trying to maintain equilibrium, really. It's trying to compensate for that. But this issue with the blood kind of falling down into the legs because the blood vessels aren't constricting properly can lead to blood pooling in the toes, feet, and sometimes even legs. And this is where they can just look a bit reddish or even purplish because there's so much blood flow in that area of the body. But people with POTS will often have a pretty pale face during a bad flare because they're not getting enough blood flow to other areas of the body, including the brain. But it's often misdiagnosed as anxiety because the physical symptoms of POTS look like the physical manifestations of anxiety. Because, when you have a panic attack, you can feel lightheaded, your heartbeat goes fast, you feel like you can't breathe properly, but these are also symptoms of POTS. However, in POTS, they aren't actually caused by feelings of anxiety, they have a physical cause. POTS causes lightheadedness, it causes profound fatigue. That's the most common symptom actually, is profound fatigue. It's said that people with POTS use 3 times as much energy just standing up than other people do. And as well as this, it causes shortness of breath. Sometimes it can cause light sensitivity, paleness, blood pooling, such as in the feet, sometimes even in the hands actually. It can cause weakness because your body gets weak when there isn't enough blood flow. It can cause high blood pressure actually. Most people with POTS talk about having low blood pressure, and POTS is actually diagnosed when there isn't a change in blood pressure, but a lot of people with POTS do experience low blood pressure. High blood pressure, however, is also a possibility. It's just less spoken about. But in a form of POTS called hyperadrenic POTS, you have high levels of adrenaline and that increases your blood pressure. I will go on to talking more about the forms of POTS in a moment. But POTS causes many different symptoms. Fainting, it's often called the fainting disorder. However, this isn't necessarily true because you can have a disabling case of POTS without ever fainting. But fainting is a possible symptom out of many. It's said between 30 to 60% of people with the condition faint. But again, you can be disabled by other symptoms like weakness and fatigue and lightheadedness and shortness of breath. It's said that the quality of life in people with POTS is about the same as people with congestive heart failure and about the same as people who are on dialysis for kidney failure. So it does impact a person's life immensely. It's horribly disabling. People with this condition, they are often so fatigued, so weak, they can't breathe properly because their whole body is overworking. Their heart rate is going really, really high. The heart is pounding. They're just using all their energy on the most basic things. It is a very disabling condition. And interestingly, it is often infection triggered. In a lot of cases, it's post-viral. So if you get a virus, sometimes it can trigger a condition like POTS, but it can sometimes also be triggered by bacterial infections. It has been associated with Lyme disease. Around 50% of people with chronic Lyme actually also have POTS. POTS is surprisingly common in the autism community and is also said to affect 9% of people with PANS. And this is interesting because not just because of the names. I know POTS and PANS together, it sounds quite funny, but they are both very disabling conditions. But it's probably more common in people with PANS because POTS is actually thought to be autoimmune in some cases. Around 80% of people with POTS have been found to have a certain antibody, so it may be autoimmune, and that also explains why it is often triggered by infections. And in people with PANS, a study has found that in PANS flares, the POTS symptoms are actually worse. Some PANS specialists say that POTS can be triggered by untreated PANDAS and PANS. Now, it is really problematic that it is often misdiagnosed as anxiety. And some people do experience anxiety with POTS. You can have them co-occurring, and sometimes the increase in adrenaline associated with POTS can present as anxiety, and sometimes people are just anxious about the symptoms in general. But a way that you can know it's not just anxiety is if your symptoms occur predominantly when upright. POTS symptoms are relieved a lot when laying down. So when you lay down, you'll probably have less symptoms if it's POTS. As well as this, blood pooling doesn't occur in anxiety. And as well as this, sometimes you can just tell, like with the extreme severity of the fatigue and weakness, you can just tell like this isn't anxiety, this is a physical issue. But also, if you just get a pulse oximeter or something and test yourself to see what your difference in heart rate is between sitting and standing, you know, you can see if there is a dramatic difference, then it's more likely to be POTS, because with anxiety, your heart rate doesn't dramatically increase just by standing, it increases when you're anxious, but you're not just anxious when you're standing. POTS symptoms can occur when sitting upright. Like, it is often spoken about that they are worse when you're standing, but it is possible to have bad symptoms when just sitting. Like, some people might sit up and just be so lightheaded just from that. So I did say I would touch upon the different subtypes of POTS. So I've already mentioned hyperadrenic POTS. This is actually said to be the most rare, but it's associated with an increase in adrenaline, and that can lead to high blood pressure. There's neuropathic POTS, which is caused by nerve damage, and then there's hypovolemic POTS, which is caused by low blood volume. However, a lot of people actually have a mix of the different forms, so a lot of doctors have stopped actually specifying what form it is, because some people have a mix of different ones. Around 50% of people with POTS have pseudomotor neuropathy, actually, so it is a neurological issue. POTS does look like a heart issue, but it's a neurological issue because it's caused by a faulty nervous system. The reason I talk about this is because I was recently told by my cardiologist that they are pretty certain that I have POTS. A neurologist I saw also thought I had POTS, so I've had numerous medical professionals say they think I have it, and I do meet diagnostic criteria. I actually, like, it's surprising to me that no doctor actually thought of it. I kind of figured it out myself, to be honest, before these doctors did, because for a long time I was very disabled by lightheadedness, shortness of breath, weakness, like muscle weakness, fatigue, all these symptoms, and I didn't really know what it was. I got a pulse oximeter, but ironically not to test my heart rate. I got it because I thought my blood oxygen would be abnormal because I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. But I made an interesting discovery that I actually had a pretty high heart rate, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. Maybe that is associated with my symptoms. But then I got myself a blood pressure monitor because I was also wondering if I could have some form of low blood pressure because I felt so weak. I wanted to make sure that that was normal. And surprisingly, my blood pressure was actually too high most of the time. So it was like not what I expected at all. But that did intrigue me, and it made me think, okay, maybe this actually is associated with my symptoms. I know it is now, but at the time I was just kind of surprised by it. So I saw a doctor and I was showing them my readings from the pulse oximeter, and they said I needed to be referred to a cardiologist. So I did, and I waited a few months, and I eventually got to have an echocardiogram, which is like, it's like an ultrasound of your heart. They put this gel on you and they look at the image of your heart. And I also had an overnight ECG, and they were normal except for a high heart rate. So again, that's like the sort of finding you would have in POTS. So then the cardiologist called me in and just said, I'm pretty sure you have a condition called POTS. And they said to wear compression socks, which I'm wearing right now. I have some cute ones. They said to drink a lot of water. They said to have more salt. They said to avoid being in the heat for too long. But yeah, it feels good to at least have an answer, and it's actually good because I didn't know whether what I had was life-threatening. I genuinely didn't know if I was dying or not, so it's good to have the explanation of, like, it's probably POTS because it's not life-threatening. I mean, it's disabling, but it's not life-threatening, and with the compression socks, they actually have helped quite a lot, and drinking more water helps a lot. And interestingly, I've heard that chronic dehydration could be part of POTS, and I believe that's because of the low blood volume. If you drink more, it can normalize that. And I wake up in the mornings and I have terrible coordination. Like, I cannot coordinate myself properly in the mornings, and I have really blurred vision, and I just feel really weird until I have a load to drink. And I think that I was actually just waking up like seriously dehydrated every morning, but when I have a lot to drink, that goes away, so I'm pretty sure that's related. So yeah, having you know, the explanation that it's most likely POTS is very helpful, and a lot of people actually guessed that because I share my experiences as a disabled person. I got a few comments, people saying like, have you looked into POTS? Sounds like POTS, and they were right. So if that was you, congratulations, you're very smart. You figured it out before I did, and before the doctors did. But yeah, it's just good to have that sort of answer, that it's not something that's going to kill me. It is hard to deal with still though, but I am getting used to it. It affects my daily life quite a lot because I use a wheelchair sometimes to go out, because sometimes my heart rate is just so high that I can't walk about much. I don't faint, but I do experience lightheadedness sometimes just from sitting up. Not today, because today is a good symptom day, which is why I'm filming, but some days I'll sit up and just be lightheaded simply from that. I experience what's termed coat hanger pain, which is like pain in your neck and shoulders when sitting or standing, and that's often relieved by laying down, and that's said to be because of reduced blood flow to the area. I experience that quite a lot. I experience a lot of fatigue. Obviously I experience the feelings of dehydration that I said about. The high blood pressure stuff used to affect me a lot. Interestingly, increasing salt has decreased that, which is ironic because for most people increasing salt would increase their blood pressure, but I think because the high blood pressure was probably associated with like maybe hypovolemia, just some part of POTS, increasing salt surprisingly actually helped it. So I'm not struggling with that as much now, but when I was, that would make me lightheaded, and I would see the blood vessels in my eyes, and I would kind of black out, but I wouldn't faint because I wouldn't lose consciousness, but I would kind of black out. Like I would sit on the floor and everything would be kind of dark, but I wouldn't completely faint. That's why I say I don't faint. And it's a weird feeling because I can genuinely feel the blood falling down my body. Like when I'm walking, I can feel my heart overworking and things falling down, but I don't get that feeling when I wear my compression socks, so I can tell they're helping. Even though my heart rate is technically still high when I'm wearing them, it's not as high as it is without them. But yeah, I think a lot of people with POTS are actually undiagnosed because woohoo, well, I think that it does look a lot like anxiety in some people, and unfortunately they often get misdiagnosed. I've known a lot of people who were originally told it was anxiety and it isn't. Because it's managed totally differently. You can't manage POTS with psychological therapy. You need things like compression socks and that sort of thing. So it's really important to get the appropriate diagnosis. And if the anxiety diagnosis doesn't feel right, and if you feel like it is something more physical, or if you feel like your symptoms are worse when upright, then look into POTS because it's a possibility. Also, other forms of dysautonomia. There are different forms. Dysautonomia means dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system. POTS is a form of it, but there are other forms too. But POTS is the most common, and it's pretty common in the autism community and the PANS community, as I said. So possibly worth looking into if you're experiencing that type of thing. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was informative. Bye!